أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله وكفى وسلامه على نبيه المصطفى وعلى آله وصحبه وكل من بآثاره مقتفى اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So brothers and sisters, today the presentation will be done by Djiby Diagne, and he doesn't need to be introduced because he did a presentation just a week ago, if I'm not mistaken, about Muslim slaves in America, in early America before slavery and after slavery. And today the presentation will be about Muslim intellectual heritage in West Africa. So it is well known that Islam was in West Africa in the 15th century.
Or earlier.
Yeah, or earlier, as he just said, in the 15th century or earlier. So we have in West Africa many Quranic schools that teach and make people memorize the Quran, and also they have universities. And it is well known that the father of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, Mamour Anta Sali, had, we can say, the biggest university at his time, because he had a Daaray that had many students, and what they were learning was the sciences of Islam, Islamic studies, such as literature. They would learn grammar and logic. They would learn also poetry and all the stuff. So they had a academic education. And so the reason why he chose this topic is that it is common that we have some misunderstanding among the Westerners that Africa is backward, or the people over there are not educated until imperialism. The colonizers, when they come, they had libraries, they have schools and stuff like that. And we know that before that, we had libraries, we have education, we have all of those stuff. So, so basically, that's the paradigm in which the presentation will go along. So, without further ado, I'm just leave him the microphone so he can explain his thoughts. Bismillah. Oh, sure.
Sayyid Omar.
Sayyid Omar.
Assalamu alaikum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Wa inni a'udhu bika wa zurriyataha minash shaitanir rajim. Rabbi a'udhu bika min hamazati shayatin wa a'udhu bika rabbi an yahdurun. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for being here. And thank Bashir for the synopsis of my presentation today. And it's as he said, there are a lot of misunderstandings among European intellectuals, North Americans especially. They have had even greater difficulty understanding Islam, even greater understanding Muslim society and individuals, Muslims, and even more comprehending Muslim societies in Africa, in African history. So the task is just as great for non-Western people educated in Western traditions, including many Muslims themselves, including people like me who went to Western schools and universities, got Western education. Part of that, we are part of this issue that I'm going to be talking about. And all of these difficulties are compounded in light of the events of September 11, 2001, their revelation and repercussions. September 11, 2001 has really changed the narratives about Islam, about Muslims, and and the relationship between Muslims and other communities, even here in the United States. So we can say that Islam honors Abraham, which is Ibrahim alayhi salam, the other prophetic figures of Old Testament, and Jesus alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, and it envisioned Muhammad as the last of a long tradition. Islam's emphasis on a transcendent and moral God owes much to these precedents. Jewish and Christian communities were present in Mecca and the other parts of the Arabian Peninsula when Muhammad was growing up, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Proximity and common tradition have encouraged understanding, but they also led to conflict. The Islamization of a large part of sub-Saharan Africa, in particular, is in direct relation to the existence of commercial networks that link this region to Mediterranean Africa and extending further to the rest of the Muslim world. These networks of trade and commercial routes from then on could not avoid becoming routes of Islamic knowledge as well, because as you know, those people who were like traveling were educated. There were scholars, there were qadis, there were hafis, and the like. So this is attested to by the important centers of teaching that developed. For example, in West Africa. West Africa is also called Bilad al-Sudan, the land of the blacks. That's how Arabs used to call West Africa. Under the Mali and Songhai empires. So you know that the Mali ruled for centuries West Africa, and then after before Ghana Empire, Mali Empire, and then the Songhai Empire. So Islam started spreading. So those were like those were big centers of population. They were very densely populated cities in the Sahara. So that developed, and they traded with other people like coming from Arabia and the Mediterranean. So they benefited largely from their contact with the Arabs and other Muslim communities. So as you know, the legendary city of Timbuktu, commercial crossroads of trans-Saharan routes, is undoubtedly the paragon of these centers. Timbuktu today is a witness and a symbol that reminds us of an important fact too often ignored when it comes to the question of intellectual history of Africa. So after World War I, the Western European powers and Russia controlled almost all the Muslim world in the exception of Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and parts of China, the Arabian Peninsula, and Ethiopia. The British, French, Russians, Dutch, Italians, and Spanish began to portray themselves as Muslim powers, which meant imperial authorities with Muslim subjects. The colonial governments accepted the Muslim identity of those subjects, but they treated them with condescension and created parallel institutions of law, education, and commerce for non-Muslims or resident Europeans. Western domination in the form of colonial rule, technological superiority, and other forms of hegemony over the land of Islam. The memory of the condescension outlasted colonial rule and fuels the anger so strikingly expressed in September 11, 2001. So, from the perspective of the West and the Mediterranean, Africa is black and coincides with the part of the continent below the Sahara Desert. So that's what's considered Africa. So back then, like in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, European intellectuals, philosophers, they believe like someone like Hegel, who considered Africa to be a continent that has no history, drew his own map of the world of Africa and took out Egypt, which he considered not to have been part of Africa itself and just said, okay, from the below the Sahara, the desert, there is no civilization, there is no even spirit there. So that's the dark continent. That's how Hegel portrayed and conceived of Africa beyond the Sahara, and that has been also his students has also developed on that theory, which led to many, portrayals, wrong and misconceptions, portrayals of Africans. So from the perspective of the West and the Mediterranean, Africa is black and coincides with the part of the continent below the Sahara Desert, sub-Saharan Africa. Outside of the continent, most scholars, students, and otherwise informed people do not think of Africa and Africans under these definitions as being Muslim, or, if Muslim, as only recently converted to the faith, not very orthodox and not very important to the history of Islam. So it's a reality that African has always been considered outside of the mainstream Islam, and they're considered like backward people who can't even even if converted to Islam, they can't practice Islam as mainstream religion and as we know. So all of these misconceptions are still widely held, often in the very prestigious places. Like you go to universities, you see scholars in Islam and history of Islam in Africa, especially Sufi Islam. You see, very prestigious chairs of history who held this misconception. One of them is Samuel Huntington. Samuel Huntington, the noted social scientist at Harvard. He serves as a telling example of the reflexive and unreflected ways in which many well-educated Western-educated people think. So, in his book, The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of the World Order, published in 1966, he sees Africa as a set of weaker civilizations. At the same time, he sees the Islamic tradition as powerful, assertive, and potentially dangerous to the West. So, in the wake of the Cold War, he writes that the overwhelming majority of fault lines, meaning the division, the rift that exists between, communities, Muslim communities, or Muslim countries and non-Muslim countries like the West. So he writes that the overwhelming majority of fault lines conflicts have taken place along the boundary looping across Eurasia. Eurasia, that's those countries, Muslim countries in the Middle East, and maybe Russia that are bordering Europe. He said that across this boundary looping across Asia, Eurasia and Africa that separate Muslims from non-Muslims. Although he might not ascribe the destruction of the World Trade Center towers to mainstream Muslims, he and many influential writers and officials are predisposed to think of Islam as oppositional and Africa as irrelevant. These worldviews have been challenged since then by many historians, like David Robinson. David Robinson, he is a retired historian who wrote many books about Islam, the history of Islam in Africa, and Islam Sufi. He wrote many books about the religious movements in Senegal, especially the Mouridiyya and other so in his book, Muslim Societies in West Africa, that he wrote in 2004, he examined a series of processes and case studies from North, West, and East Africa. It is a snapshot of Muslim societies in Africa over the last millennium. In contrast to traditions which suggest that Islam did not take root in Africa, David Robinson shows the complex struggles of Muslims in the Muslim state of Morocco and in the Hausaland region of Nigeria. He portrays the way in which Islam was practiced in pagan societies of Ashanti, Buganda, and in ostensibly Christian state of Ethiopia, beginning with the first immigration of Muslims from Mecca in 615. Islam entered Africa, was in Africa before it was spread in Arabia. Because remember, the first group the first Sahabas that the Prophet sent to Ethiopia and who were protected by the Ethiopian ruler and the niggers of Ethiopia. So in 615. So mind you, Islam entered Africa even before it was spread in the Arabian Peninsula and the rest of the world. He concludes with chapters of the Mahdi and Khalifa and the Murid Sufi movement that originated in Senegal. So another book that's challenging some of this view was written by our Senegalese counterpart, Cheikh Anta Babou, who is a history professor at the University of Pennsylvania, Fighting the Great Jihad, which is one of these books here. So, Fighting the Great Jihad, Ahmadou Bamba and the Founding of the Muridia. So, in his book, he focuses on the founder's life and ideas set against the background of his family's history, the Mbake family, of course. The focus of education and tarbiyah offers an interpretation of the social action of the Murid order that is grounded in Sufi thought. So this book offers a new interpretation of the Muridia of Senegal in the late 19th century Sufi brotherhood founded by Cheikh Ahmadou Mbake. So and so on and so forth. So Babu was actually one of the first to open the path for many other researchers and academics who are working and researching on Africa to have a better perspective on Muridia and its founder, Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba, and his method of teaching and education, his and the reform that he brought into education and Quranic Islamic learning in Senegal. So the other one is Sufism and Jihad in modern Senegal, the Murid order, written by John Glover. He's a historian, professor at Rochester University in upstate New York. So he thinks that where historians of Islam in West Africa have conventionally used French conquest as the starting point, meaning many historians working on Islam in Senegal, in West Africa generally, in Senegal in particular, they have used the colonial, what is called the colonial library. The colonial library, many even scholars, African scholars, who believe that before the colonial library there was no intellectual heritage or legacy in Africa, which of course caused an uproar and a heated debate among their other intellectual colleagues in other universities who are researching and writing about Africa. So the colonial library, some believe, is the only reliable source of intellectual heritage and knowledge for Africans, and it started with the arrival of the Europeans, either French people, French-speaking, English-speaking, Portuguese-speaking, or Spanish-speaking. So, but that was not the case, and that's part of what has made other of their colleagues respond to them. Someone like Usman Khan, or someone like Rudolf Ware, or someone like Falungom and the like. And I'm gonna come to them now. So in this book, and Glover tried to expand also on modernization, the concept of jihad. Like so many have misconceived, thinking that jihad is only done by the weapons, by the catch of weapons. No, you can have jihad. Several levels of jihad exist, and of course, he's demonstrating in this book. Where's the book of Glover? Oh, okay. He's demonstrating in this book, taking the example of Daaray Musti that was founded by Imam Daaray as an example of the path of modernization of communities of Islamic tradition, and learning how they were entering the path of modernization in Senegal. So, and the reformist movement, the wall of civil wars, and the impact of the transatlantic slave trades. Glover is interested in the multiple histories throughout which one can tell the story of modern of Murid modernities, neither an alternative to nor aligned with colonialism. In Clover's conception, Murid modernities speak to the incorporation of the tariqah into local, regional, and global circulation through trade, labor, military service, cash crop production, and taxes. So the other author, which is Professor Usman Khan, who's a historian also at Harvard University, he wrote in response to those proponents of the colonial library, he wrote the non-Europhone intellectuals. Non-Europhone intellectuals understand here those intellectuals who have not been to what we call Western schools, meaning European school, who didn't receive European education. So in contrast, he studies the research carried out on the Islamic library, which is the opposite to the colonial library, and shows that Muslim intellectuals in West Africa, in particular, have produced huge literature in Arabic and Ajami. Ajami, I was talking about the other day about Ajam and the literature of Ajami, which Professor Fallugom here in his book here, he expounds on and delve into that legacy that is left by these Ajami intellectuals in West Africa, and especially in Senegal, in the Murid community. It is impossible to reconstitute this library completely as the text, because those old manuscripts are being lost or kept by families. Certain families, they keep them and they don't conserve them the right way, so over time it got destroyed and things like that. So so it is impossible to reconstitute the Islamic library completely, as we have today modern tools of preserving and conservation that are used like widely in libraries around the world to conserve old manuscripts. So, but the Islamic library has a lot of challenges and a lot of obstacles to overcome before people can even have a very complete and exhaustive and reconstitution of that Islamic library, as the texts have existed for centuries and are mostly in the form of unpublished manuscripts. Only some of them have been transmitted to us, while others have perished because of poor conservation. Efforts toward collecting them continues, and the documents collected thus far attest to an intense intellectual life and important debates on society that have been completely ignored by the overwhelming majority of Europhone intellectuals. So those who went to European schools, and it's still today very prevalent among them, to believe that those who went to Quranic school and studied Islamic sciences should not be considered as intellectual. So, which is very absurd, because those who went to Quranic school also have learned the same sciences, they have learned the same topics, the same discipline, the same subjects that their Europhone intellectual counterparts. And it's just about these people learning in French and these others learning to Arabic, and there's no difference. They're all intellectual and should not be considered as non-intellectual. So in response to those proponents of that theory, Usman Khan responded to them. And so during European colonial rule and after the independence of African nations, Islamic education experienced some neglect, but the Islamic scholarly tradition did not decline. On the contrary, it has prospered with the proliferation of modern Islamic school and the rise of dozens of Islamic institutions of higher learning. In recent years, the field of Islamic studies in West Africa has continued to attract the attention of erudite scholars, notably in anthropology and history, who are investing in learning the languages and working on this Islamic archive. As you know, if you go to Columbia University here, for instance, they have a department where you can learn like Wolof, where you can learn Hausa, where you can learn Kanuri. Those are spoken languages in Africa, and those are spoken languages of Muslim communities who have used their own language to write, about an array of topics regarding their own life and their Islamic tradition. So you have the Sopey, and in Senegal you have the Wolof, you have the Tukulur, you have the Fulani. All of those communities have used their own language, using the Arabic script to write about Islam, about facts of life and issues they were facing, and using still this Islamic tradition. So as more analytical works are done on this archive, there will be continued modification in terms of the debate on knowledge production in West Africa. So there's a large debate regarding knowledge production, even outside of the Islamic tradition, among intellectual Western educated intellectuals, about there's a large debate about knowledge production. But there already exists a huge production of knowledge, but in Arabic. So another book by the same author, Beyond Timbuktu, An Intellectual History of West Africa, where Timbuktu is very famous for its Quranic school, its mosque. Timbuktu and Djenne, they were like one of those very first learning centers and universities in sub-Saharan Africa. So, but yet, even during Islam's golden age, there have been like contacts and relations between communities in Mali, Ghana during the Empire Ghana and other community. So yet Timbuktu is not unique. It was among many scholarly centers to exist in pre-colonial West Africa, like the center of we have Pir Sanyohor, that was founded by Amar Kharifal in the early 17th century during the reign of Damel Bakhurejo Kuli, who granted him land, who was his cousin by the way. So the Amar Kharifal, he chose knowledge and erudition instead of power, secular power. Damel Bakhurejo Kuli was his cousin, so he could have pretended to that secular power as him, but he chose not to. And Pir Sanyohor also was like a great center of learning at the university level, center of high learning too, because it was the place where the whole Wolof community and the Fulbe, the Pearl community, that's where they went to learn. And you hear Almami Abdel Kader Khan, whom I was talking about last time here, and many others like Mama Haram, who's the great grandfather of Sri Tuba, and many others. They learned from, they went to bed to study. So Pir like Timbuktu, and later you had like in Senegal, you have the school of Koki. Koki also was one of those centers that, like Timbuktu or Djenne, that existed, and it was among many scholarly centers to exist in Peru. So the West African tradition of Islamic learning has grown in tandem with the spread of Arabic literacy. So remember, you learn the Quran, but also you learn how to read and write Arabic, and you learn grammar, you learn logic, you learn poetry, you learn sciences, you learn literature and all that. So which means those Africans that were being considered as non-intellectuals, they were learning and reading books that even Europeans at this time have not yet read or known or discovered, because they were reading translations of Arabic philosophers and Arabic scholars of Islam, etc., etc. So in post-colonial period, dramatic transformation of West African education, together with the rise of media technologies and the ever-evolving public roles of African Muslim intellectuals, continue to spread knowledge of Islam throughout the continent. So the history of Arabic writing spans a period of 800 years in sub-Saharan Africa. So I was mentioning, so Islamic tradition has been there forever. So hundreds of thousands of manuscripts in Arabic or Ajami are preserved in public libraries and private collections in sub-Saharan Africa. This Islamic library includes historical, devotional, pedagogical, polemical, and political writings, most of which have not yet been adequately studied. So mind you, there are like tons of untapped resources of intellectual tradition from Arabic, written by these Arabic scholars of African descent, of course, that are out there, not yet studied. So in this book here, the author, which is Falungom, who's our friend and co-disciple at the University of Senegal. He's now at the University of Boston. That's what he's trying to do here, because he's using old manuscripts and writings in Wolofal, Ajami Wolofal, of those great poets and philosophers and social critics like the likes of Serigne Moussaka or Serigne Mbaye Diakhaté, Serigne Samba Diarra Mbaye, so on and so forth. That's those manuscripts that he's trying to bring forth and study and dig into the well of knowledge that are contained in those manuscripts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about his book, which is Muslims Beyond the Arab World, the Odyssey of Ajami and the Muridiya, published in 2016. So the book offers a close reading of the rich by hagiographic meaning the history as it evolved throughout time and throughout the communities of believers and Muslims, especially in Senegal. So he's in the hagiographic and didactic, written, recited, and chanted Ajami text of the Muridiya. The Murids, they recite their text, they memorize it, but also they chant it and they write it. So most of the writing was done either in Arabic or in Ajami. Okay, so Ajami meaning, I was explaining, you use the Arabic script to write your own language. Like the Wolof we speak, we can write it using Arabic script, like we use the Latin script to write Wolof. So the text described the life and Sufi odyssey of the order's founder, Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba, 1853-1927, his conflicts with local rulers and Muslim clerics and the French colonial administration, and the traditions and teaching he championed that permanently shaped the identity and behaviors of his followers. So he has, in his Ajami materials, he used them as an effective mass communication tool in conveying them to the masses Bamba's poignant odyssey, doctrine, the virtue he stood for and cultivated among his followers, which are self-esteem, self-reliance, strong faith, work ethic, pursuit of excellence, determination, non-violence, and optimism in the face of adversity without the knowledge of the French colonial administration and many academics. So Muslims Beyond the Arab World argues that this is the source of the resilience, appeal, and expansion of Muridiya, which has fascinated observers since its inception in 1882. We can say the same about Muridiya than other socio-religious movements that spread at different times and in different geography and spaces and regions in Africa, West Africa. We can say the same about them because they also use the same tools and the same methods of Quranic learning and also writing their own history or their own conception about their rapport, their relationship vis-a-vis the colonial ruler and stuff. So another one, which is this book here, the Walking Quran. As you can see, the Walking Quran, Islamic education, embodied knowledge and history in West Africa, which is spanning 1,000 years of history and bringing the story of the present through ethnographic fieldwork in Senegal, Gambia, Mauritania. So the author documents the profound significance of Quran schools. So for West African Muslim communities, remember all this tradition of Quranic learning that we even we transpose, we transport, and we take everywhere we go. We West African Muslims. This is actually the foundation. So this foundation of Quranic learning dates back 1,000 years ago. So mind you, we're not West Africans are not new to Islam. So such schools peacefully brought Islam to much of the region, so becoming strikingly symbols of Muslim identity. So he shows how in Senegambia the school became powerful channels of African resistance during the eras of the slave trade and colonization. I was talking about the Muslim slaves last week. So those Muslim slaves, they were like who were caught by the slave trade, in between the slave trade, and who are intellectuals already, who know how to read and write in Arabic. So that education that they had before being enslaved, that has helped them a lot when they were here. I talked about how they were given status and were treated better than the others, the other slaves that couldn't read or write like them. So even that tradition of learning and Islamic learning and Quranic schools and community building, that has been like another source of resistance for people during the slave trade, and also during colonization. So while illuminating the past, he also makes signal contribution to understanding contemporary Islam by demonstrating how the school's epistemology meaning it's a philosophical word that means the origin of something. The school epistemology meaning the origin of the schools, of the epistemology of embodiment. Embodiment gives expression to classical Islamic frameworks of learning and knowledge. So here, just to say that the learning, like the walking Quran, people are taught to memorize the whole Quran. So we can call them, I can call Bashir a walking Quran. I can call Ustaz a walking Quran. I can call Abdul Khadr a walking Quran, because they know the Quran. Even if people want to burn the Quran today, we can, we will write it out of memory. We can write the whole Quran out of memory. So that's today many Muslims and non-Muslims find West African methods of Quran schooling puzzling and controversial. So many people think that this is a very controversial or maybe outdated method of Quran learning or teaching Quran, the way in West Africa we teach and don't teach Quran. So I will come a little bit later on the issue of modernization of these Quranic schools. So in fascinating details, where introduces these practices from the viewpoint of the practitioners, explicating the emphasis on education, the whole human being, as if to remake it as a living replica of the Quran. From this perspective, the transference of knowledge is in cortex and rituals is literally embedded in people and helping shape them like the Prophet of Islam into vital bearers of the word of God. That's what I was just explaining. So when you were shaped and formed, trained, informed about Quran, you become like a textual embodiment of the text, of the original text of the Quran, which you can read, recite, and copy like verbatim, word to word, without making any mistake. So that's part of that legacy that we are talking about here. So the Ink of the Scholars, Reflections of Philosophy in Africa by Professor Sulaiman Bashir Jan, who was our guest like 2 weeks ago, right? So the same issues about what has been said about Muslim scholars who are from West Africa, who has not been considered in mainstream intellectual library or colonial library, as they call it. Those same issues are also brought in this text written by Sulaiman Bashir. But the title of the text, The Ink of the Scholars, it's a quotation that is attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a hadith saying, the hadith goes, the ink of the scholars is more sacred than the blood of the martyrs. Say it in Wolof, maanaam deretu maanaam borom xam-xam yi seen daa, seen the ink, seen daa gi ñuy bindee moo gën a sacré maanaam deretu saxaaba yi sax dañ koy wax wala ñi nga xam dañoo dee ci yoonu islam maanaam shahid yi nee na ñu ñoom boroom xam-xam yi seen li ñuy bindee moo gën a kawe moo gën a sell deretu shahid yi kon so Professor Bashir Diagne also he brought the same he was analyzing and treating that topic of how philosophy should be related with Africans, West Africans, even though the debate is still going on how philosophers in Africa should think and write as philosophers, even though they are trained in Western schools and Western way of thinking and the like. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about now. I'm going to talk about dual literacy through Quranic education. So dual literacy meaning those who go to Quranic schools, if they stay there for a certain period of time, they will end up learning and knowing how to read and write Arabic and how to speak it and all the like. And so West African Muslim communities largely share the same Quranic education system. So if you go to Guinea, if you go to Mauritania, if you go to Mali, if you go to Sierra Leone or Senegal, the Gambia, you will see the same education system of Quranic school teaching. So like we have here, this is a traditional setting of Quranic school method. So they use the same method and they have the same objectives. So their education system typically involves the key phases found in the Murid community. I'm going to use the Murid community as an example. So in the Murid tradition, Njangum Dara, which is of course Quranic education, includes 5 key phases. So that you guys may not know because you've never been into a traditional Quranic school. I personally did not go to traditional Quranic school. Omar, you did not, right?
I did.
You did? No, I mean Dara.
No, it depends what you mean Dara.
Dara, like where Abdul Samad went.
No, I did not.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We grew in urban areas. You grew in Dakar, I grew in Rufisque, we grew up there. So we went to a Quranic school like we, but not like Njangum Dara. Njangum Dara is different. So then going to like Quranic school, like in urban settings, where you just go, you memorize, some chapters, or maybe you may be lucky to know the whole Quran, memorize it, the whole Quran, but that wasn't the case for everyone. So because we had like to go to school, we go to Quranic school, on off days, on Wednesday or weekends, we go to Quranic school, on holidays, that's when we usually like go to Quranic school full time, that's it. But beside that, we're in school, So Njangum Dara includes 5 key phases. So the 2 first one focus on teaching students reading skills, like we do here, like Ustaz does. He when you come here, he introduces you to the alphabet and to the sounds and those 2 phases that we are talking about here, which is Dal and Fer Iji. Those are the 2 first phases, and orthography learning maybe. So students are taught the individual non-vocalized Maghribi Arabic script. Maghribi is the teaching methods that we inherited from the Maghreb, which is the West, like Morocco and stuff. So each ethno-linguistic community in West Africa has developed its own orthographic pedagogy. So with names of each of the 28 letters of the Arabic orthography. Some names of the letters are carefully constructed to serve mnemonic devices. Mnemonic, it's a philosophical term that means something that can like memorize and keep it like in a hard drive. You keep like information in a hard drive and remember it. Like sometimes people tell you have a mémoire d'éléphant, meaning you can record a lot of things and memorize a lot of things. And so part of how we school children are taught the Quran and stuff is part of making them have that mnemonic memory that facilitates student learning. So after the second phase, students move to the stage called Bole. Bole meaning putting together. In this phase, they learn the diacritics for vocalization and how to read different combinations of vocalized Arabic letters. After this phase, students move to the third phase called Mokal. So all of these I'm talking about here, Professor Falungom in his book, he elaborated much more on these methods of teaching and learning the Quran in West Africa, in Senegal specifically, among the Murid community. So in this phase, they learn short chapters of the Quran and move gradually to the longer ones until they can recite from memory, which is tari. Until they can recite from memory the entire Quran. The primary goal of Quranic education is to ingest the Word of God in the heart and the body of students through memorization, so that each of them becomes what Ware calls a walking Quran. So, meaning a moral and spiritual exemplar, meaning a copy taught by the Quran and epitomized by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So for this particular reason, through memorization, though memorization does not represent the entire education system, it is a pivotal component. So after the memorization, Quranic students move to the fourth phase called Bekhi in Wolof, which is supervised writing. So you're going to be tasked to write chapters. Ustaz, no, he went through that, through this phase. He went through all these phases I'm talking about here. So, and in this phase, they assign Quranic text to copy and on their wooden tablets with the right punctuations and vocalization on the Arabic letters. As students read, memorize, and copy their Quranic lessons on their wooden tablets, they increasingly master the Maghribi Arabic orthography of the Quranic text. So thus, before they graduate, they have mastered well the Maghribi Arabic orthography of the Quran. While they do not speak Arabic, they can comfortably read and write in the Maghribi Arabic orthography. So in this phase, the teacher regularly reviews their lessons, their writings, and gives them feedbacks. When they have demonstrated their ability to write flawlessly each assigned Quranic text, their wooden tablet are washed and another Quran lesson is written on them. Students continue this process of supervised writing until the teacher is confident that they are capable of producing a handwritten copy of the Quran, of the entire Quran from memory, with the appropriate diacritics, punctuations, and internal divisions, and so on. People who reach this high level of in the traditional Quranic education system are common among the Kanuri people in Nigeria, Fouta Djallon in Guinea, Fula people, Hausa, the Fulfulde, the Mandinka, the Jahanke, and the Wolof. The Jahanke also living in the southeast part of Senegal, and the Wolofs that's composed of all Wolof speaking communities, Islamized communities in Senegal. Senegal is 95% Wolof. So to just name this, because you got other many communities that so after the Bekhi, this phase, which is supervised writing, comes the final phase of Quranic education called Bind Kamil. You know what Bind Kamil is, right? Right? So Bind Kamil, which means like writing a complete copy of the Quran out of memory. So at this phase, only la crème de la crème, those the best of the best, the top of the top, only reach this level. Not me. I didn't reach this level because of whatever many reasons they were there that prevented me from achieving this level. So and then they become Hafiz. We have Bashir here and Khadeem. That was Khadeem Kebe, right? Fallou Kebe, who became Hafiz under the supervision of Ustaz Abdul Samad like 2 years ago. So during this phase, they have to write the entire copy of the Quran free of errors. No errors should be, and out of memory. So they have to pay particular attention to details such as the correct diacritics on each letter, vocalization, punctuation, and internal division of the Quran. So Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, the founder of the Muridiya Sufi order of Senegal, promoted decorative arts, calligraphy, and colorful illumination of the Quran and he required his disciples to include them in their handwritten copies of the Quran. So to make sure that students' complete copies of the Quran are acceptable, the teacher evaluates them carefully. This evaluation process is referred to as topat, right? So, which means double checking. So you go again through, you proofread, you double check that the student has written a full, complete, error-free copy of the Quran, and then he becomes a Hafiz. So a committee of experts also evaluates the quality of the student's handwriting copies of the Quran and his knowledge of the Quran. And this is like throughout West Africa. If you go to Nigeria, Mauritania, in Guinea, in the Gambia, the same process is used, as well as in Senegal. So there are numerous handwritten copies of the Quran, at the library of Touba, Daaray Kamil, right? Daaray Kamil. And also, if you go to other communities in Guinea, in Mali, you found in the libraries, like if you go to Timbuktu or Djenne, also, which are like one of those oldest learning centers in West Africa, you will find copies of handwritten Quran that were written like 200-300 years ago. But unfortunately for Pir, Pir was attacked during the colonial days by the Colonel Penelaprat, who burned it to the ground, and it is even said that when people heard that Penelaprat was coming with his troops, with his army, some people tried to save some books. It is said that some people even dug pits and buried some books there. So I guess some research needs to be done and localize those areas where those books were buried. Try to find out those books, because when Penelaprat came, he burned everything to the ground. So that was also one of those many obstacles that these intellectual Muslims faced, because also the French, they wanted to destroy everything that was not written out of their own language or means of communication, which was French. So you'll see also Murid men and women have written copies of Quran. Women also have become Quranic teachers and Sufi guides in many clerical families in West Africa. Especially if you go to Nigeria, or you look at the Niass family in Senegal, the Mariama Niass, she opened a big, she's a Sufi teacher. She's a Sufi herself. And she opened a school, Quranic school, which is very famous, very private school, which is in Dakar. And where? Padua, in Padua, right? And I think she has another one in Kaolack, right? Okay, so if you go also to Nigeria, the daughter of Usman Danfejo, also who was a Sufi guide and a Quranic teacher, also you have there also many Quranic schools run by women. So hundreds of I mentioned Daaray Kamil, and so the last phase, after you went through those 5 phases I just mentioned, the phase of handwriting Quran, a handwritten copy of the Quran, you produce one, and then you are a Hafiz. After that phase, now you're gonna go to the next level, which is like higher education. So you're gonna go to Njangom Khamkham. So knowledge studies, literally meaning studies of Islamic sciences, of course. At this stage, students can continue their advanced studies in different domains of Islamic science, including exegesis of liturgical texts, Maliki jurisprudence, which dominates in West Africa, Sufism, Arabic languages, grammar, poetry, Islamic medicine, numerology, among other subjects. Some conduct peripatetic learning. Peripatetic meaning you travel from one learning center to another learning center. That's what's called peripatetic. It's a word that's derived from the Greek, like Socrates and Plato, who used to go from place to place in public places and conversing and teaching people about whatever they've learned or whatever. So this peripatetic learning this peripatetic learning tradition has brought many West African Muslim scholars and families from different countries and ethno-linguistic groups together. So marriages resulting from such interaction are not uncommon, as some satisfied teachers offer their daughters to their students who earn their trust and live them to their moral and spiritual standards. Although Ajami literacy is generally not formally taught in Quranic school, Quranic students acquire the local form of Ajami through socialization with minimal tutoring. So I personally learned how to write in Ajami. I am not that very at an advanced level, but I have like intermediary knowledge of Ajami writing that I taught that I learned myself when I was back when I was in Quranic school in my neighborhood. So I saw my Quranic teacher writing that. So I even didn't know the term or the name Ajami. So I just saw him writing, and I was very close to him. So I would sometimes, read what he's writing, and it was Wolof. I was reading Wolof. I'm like, wow, you can write Wolof using Arabic letters. I was in primary school back then, even not knowing that I can even write, my language using. So that's when I started learning from there. That's how I learned, and you have now many communities in West Africa because, like the level of the rate of illiteracy, Western educated illiterate is higher than those who learn from Islamic and Quranic literacy. So the rates are as high as 70, 75 to 80%, depending on. In Senegal, it is said 70% of the people of population is illiterate. So when they say illiterate, they don't include those who are literate in Arabic. So they will just like say 70% illiteracy rate, meaning only those who went to French school. That's it. Those are illiterate. But you have higher rates of literacy among those who learn, who've been to Quranic or Quranic school and learn Arabic. You have higher literacy rate among those groups than in the groups of those who went to French school. That's the paradox, and and the paradigm that needs to be shifted when giving these rates of literacy. So people who reach advanced level of Quranic education use their dual literacy skills, which I was just mentioning, to produce a variety of learned material in Arabic and Ajami. You have people like Serigne Mbaye Jaxate, Serigne Moussaka, Serigne Samba Diarra Mbaye. In Senegal only, they even mentioned by Cheikh Anta Diop in his book Nation Nègre et Culture, when he was talking about the culture and art and culture, that part dealing with art and culture, he assumed that these poets, they were not only poets, they were writing about social crises, they were writing about social issues, they were writing about any kind of issue that people were facing in their society. They were social critics, they were philosophers, they were educators, and they were like inspirational speakers, and all the positive aspect that you can get from their poetry. They learn Arabic, and knowing that most of the people don't understand Arabic, so they shifted using their own language, writing it down and putting it into songs so that people can learn from them. The basic of the moral values of Islam, of their religion, and of Muridiya especially, and all the teachings that Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba was trying to put there, but in Arabic. So they took it using their own skills, that dual literacy that they have, they gotten from their Quranic background. So this include religious and didactic texts in prose and poetry, genealogies, local histories, biographies, medical manuals in Arabic and Ajami, and translation and commentaries of important Islamic documents, just like I was explaining. So all these dual literate Muslims either in Senegal, in Guinea, in Nigeria, in Niger, anywhere you go that you find Muslim communities, people have been capable and able of using their dual literacy to expound and expand their knowledge and their connection to their people using their skills, dual literacy skills. So throughout